Hola, ciao. Really excited to be talking about how to make language planning super simple, super accessible, and hopefully help it stick so that we can reach our language goals. So, today I'll be talking about three simple steps to language planning, breaking it down not only between the three goals, but also giving you some sentence starters or some things to think about, journal about, so that we can really be intentional about our goals and then hopefully achieve our goals. So, getting started, our agenda, we are going to understand our why. We're going to determine our goal date, be specific in what we want to achieve, then talk about what those next steps look like so we can actually implement this plan. And then if you have any questions, I have a way that you guys can reach me so that we can continue this conversation. A little bit about me and my experience. I am a student of language, a teacher of language, an expert in language. My background is that I am Puerto Rican, and I was born on the island, but mostly raised in the diaspora. And so that means that I had an opportunity to learn my home language at home, that home language being Spanish, as well as additional languages because they were of interest to me, Italian and Japanese. As a teacher, I have experience from K to 12 Spanish teaching and higher education. I also taught as a professor at some local colleges. And as an expert, I really honed in on educational language policies, trying to think about how we are creating spaces for our multilingual students versus restricting spaces. So, how are the policies that we're putting into place helping our teachers, our leaders, and especially our students in accessing their home language as well as additional languages? So, in all of my experience, the running theme is that language is important. Diversity of language is even more important, and that there should be a choice for students to learn either a language that they feel is connected to their home culture or their family, as well as any additional languages that they feel will give them access to a global world. So today I'll be thinking about creating a language plan through a couple of different avenues. This will apply whether or not you are someone who is saying, I want to learn more of my home language. Perhaps you didn't have the opportunity to do so at home because your parents didn't have an opportunity to share that home language, or they were concerned about your access to that home language plus English if you're in an English dominant space, as well as additional languages. You might just be someone who, for fun, for recreation, is learning additional languages. So we'll talk about how those will look and sound different, but regardless, the language plan and the three simple steps to that language plan will apply. It's just a matter of kind of tailoring it to your particular needs. And so, step number one, very easy, is just defining your why. Learning a language is something that is very rewarding, but it can be very challenging. And so, understanding your why in those challenging moments helps to keep you motivated, helps you ground in your goals, especially in those more challenging moments. And you'll have a lot of moments that you'll be able to celebrate, but understanding your why. So, thinking about questions like, why are you learning this language? What are you working towards? And of what you're working towards, because a lot of individuals really want to achieve, especially speaking fluency. And so, the question that I would ask is, in addition to what you want to achieve, what's the minimum version of success and what would feel like a bonus? So if you define your why and you're saying to yourself, I'm learning this language because I potentially want to feel something. I'm learning to feel more confident in the way that I speak with my relatives, with my family members, with my partner's family. There's many reasons. So you might want to internalize it and say, I am learning so that I can feel a certain way. Or it might be relationship driven. And so you might say, I'm learning in order to connect with this person. Potentially your partner speaks another language. And so you both, or all of you, are working on meeting each other and learning additional languages and having that connection and that vulnerability. Potentially, you're looking to connect with friends. Potentially, you are looking to travel and connect with individuals in this great, beautiful global world. And so, the more that you understand your why in those celebrations, you can orient your celebrations towards your why. And in those challenging moments, you can remind yourself of the bigger picture and why you are planning all of this, why you are working towards all of this, because sometimes it can be an additional thing, especially as adults, that we're doing. So anything to help us remember why and how it's tied, the language learning is tied to our values, is going to help us maintain that consistency. Step two, set your timeline. And so ideally, of course, we are all able to speak all of the languages and we wouldn't be uncomfortable in learning a new language. But the reality is that there is joy in the journey, number one. So learning something new can feel very rewarding. And at the same time, if you are trying to achieve something, being very clear and understanding what you're working towards and how much time. Any good teacher will tell you it's all about backward mapping. And so you want to, if you're project planning, if you're teaching a certain concept or curriculum, the a very big component of how you approach that plan has everything to do with the timing. And so understanding, do you need to do it by a certain date? Because you'll be traveling to connect with these people on that date? Is it a lifelong journey? And so you just want to set a check-in point a year from now? There are many timelines that you can set for yourself, but two that I highly recommend is either the final date if it's within the year, because it gives you an end point. Otherwise, if it's a lifelong journey, sometimes we forget to check in and celebrate. And because we are not checking in and celebrating, we might feel overwhelmed with everything that we have to do, language learning plus living our lives. So having something within a year and then something much sooner, like a midpoint, helps to break up the bigger timeline, because the reality is that weeks and months kind of pass by pretty quickly, but you'll see that if you at least are working towards a set date, that's why oftentimes signing up for a marathon, a half marathon, a 5K, that timeline holds you accountable. And it also gives you a fun excuse to set either a vacation or a date to celebrate, to visit family members. So think about your why and then set a timeline according to that why so that it really hones in what you're doing for the next step, which is step three, be specific. What exactly do you want to do with the language? Again, we can be idealist and we can say, I want to do all the things with the language. I want to speak, listen, read, and write. I want to be fully confident, fully fluent. And that is something that we absolutely can work on. But sometimes in achieving full fluency, we might feel overwhelmed and just stop learning at all. And if there's anything that I want these three steps to do is to remind you that this is absolutely possible, breaking it up into small chunks. As somebody who has run a half marathon, worked on my dissertation for my doctorate, I've achieved these bigger goals only because of what my dad says, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so we need to have our why, we need to have our timeline so that we can break it into smaller chunks. And then we also need to think about what exactly is it that I want to do? Do you want to speak with someone? So then you might be focusing on more auditory and speaking skills. You might practice speaking and listening either with a teacher, with a speaking partner. Is it that you want to be able to read a certain text? If so, that's something that's really tangible that you can share with your teacher or with whoever's supporting you in learning language. In what settings do you want to be able to do these things? Is it something that you want to do in a professional space versus a social space? That language, that vocabulary is going to be very different. With whom? How I speak with my friends who are a range of ages, but uh, potentially some of them Gen Z. I'm learning language from them all of the time because I identify as an older millennial. It's going to be different than how I speak to potentially my grandmother. So thinking about that diversity of language and then practicing that diversity of language is going to be really helpful. Otherwise, there's many situations where people are learning another language and then they're in certain spaces and they might not have the certain dialect or the certain vocabulary in order to feel confident. So all of that work has been done and then they don't feel as confident as they could or should as if they would have if they would have planned according to their goals. Are there apps and tools that can support you? So there's a lot of resources that are out there in terms of language teachers, and I really highly recommend any schools, any online curriculums, any uh, TikTok teachers, anybody who is very specific in not only the language that they're instructing, but in the variety of that language. So what I mean by that is if you are learning Spanish, from where do you want to learn Spanish from? If you are learning English, from where? Learning English, learning, for example, British English. There's a lot of different ways to speak British English. As someone from the UK can instruct on, I have less familiarity, but I know that for sure there's different ways of speaking English within the United States. The West Coast is very different from the East Coast, it's very different from the South. There's so much variety there. So the more that you can be specific in how you want to speak and who you want to speak with, the more intentional you'll be in your practice and the more confident that you'll be in actually using the language when it comes time to practice. And that's what all of this is about, right? The language planning is all about giving you the tools and the resources to be super intentional so that when you're practicing, your time is maximized. And therefore, when you get into actual settings where you're practicing the language, whether it's speaking, reading, writing, or listening, you say, this is exactly what I've been practicing. I'm ready for this moment because we are emotional people and it is a very vulnerable thing to learn a different language. And so the more that we can help calm our nervous system down by saying, I know that I can do this because I have done this in other settings, the more that we build up the evidence to show ourselves that we got this. And we do. We're absolutely capable. You are absolutely capable of practicing any language or language variety. It is just a matter of being very intentional about your plan. You do this with many other things, with business goals, with health goals. You can go into the gym every day, and if you're not intentional, if you don't have a plan, you'll just end up exhausted and you might not see the results that you want. Whereas if you're very focused, you might find that you have even more energy, more excitement, more motivation because all of your planning has put you in a place where you are doing the practice and then seeing the results. And that's what I want for us. So, sentence starters for being specific. I will speak with so and so about X topic. And this can be a couple of different topics. I'll give an example, but this looks like but really hone in on the topics that you want. Do you want to speak about school? Would you like to speak about your activities, recreational activities? Would you like to speak about music and different types of music? Another example is I will write to so and so about X topic. I will understand content, blank content, at least 80% of the time. Whatever's going to make you feel comfortable and confident. And it's really important that I make sure to mention that obviously you would want these different modalities to be practiced because it only reinforces the language as a whole. So ideally, you are speaking and listening and practicing your reading and writing and even thinking about language, that metalinguistic connection. How is your home language or the language that you feel dominant in connected to this new language? What similarities and what differences? That's only going to further reinforce your language acquisition. And as adults, as people who have a lot of responsibilities, sometimes we need to prioritize. And so the purpose of these three steps are essentially to help you prioritize. That way you can feel like you're making progress. And then from there, it becomes a habit that you can continue practicing. So a framework that you can work with is I am learning language to what's the purpose? By X date, I will be able to, what's the skill? Do you want to read, write, speak, listen about what topic? And here's the trick to stay on track. I'll check in on X date to be able to do something that's a little bit closer. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like using this framework with something that actually I am working on myself. So this is my use of the framework for my language planning, for my Japanese language learning. I am learning Japanese to connect with my niece's heritage and to revisit a culture that I briefly lived in. By December, my later goal, right? By December 2025, I will be able to chat with my teacher about my weekly activities and things that I do or do not want to do. So my goal by December is to be able to speak about recreational activities, be able to do greetings and farewells confidently, speaking at the very least. Ideally, I also have some reading and writing. I'll check in by August 2025. That's my midpoint to review simple sentences and 5 common tasks. So my midpoint is essentially saying, okay, by this midpoint, I want to make sure that I at least have 5 common tasks that I do on an everyday basis. I know for sure that I read most days. I spend time with my family. How am I translating and confidently speaking to those things in the target language in Japanese? So next steps. We have our 3 steps to language planning. We are ready to actually do something with this information. So I encourage you all to journal your language planning goals. So using those sentence starters and starting to think about that framework and looking at your calendar and also being honest about what you have coming up. What can you work towards? Record your language goal dates on your calendar. We are all living in a digital world these days. And so, whether or not it's a digital calendar, which I highly recommend because that way it'll send you notifications and you can also set reoccurring reminders. Or if it's on paper and pencil, but be very intentional about putting down your language goal date on your calendar and then setting reoccurring reminders to check in weekly or daily based on your goals. Language learning is best in community. And so choosing an accountability measure, so whether or not it's social media, I've seen a lot of people on social media, on TikTok, practicing their language, and that holds them accountable, and that is fantastic. It's also a great way of doing it in kind of that middle point where you're speaking and you're getting some sort of feedback from folks in the comments. So that's fantastic if you feel comfortable. A language partner is also an option. A language teacher is highly recommended. A friend, if you just have a friend that you are holding each other accountable on different goals, that's also an opportunity. But make sure to actually, outside of yourself, choose someone that you trust to remind you to stay on track. And then choose a celebration for achieving the goals, whether it's big or small. So whether you get to the end and you've been able to accomplish everything you set out, or whether you got to the midpoint and you have to rethink your goals, but you were able to achieve some, if not all, of what you were striving for. Like I've said, language learning is vulnerable, language learning is challenging, but language learning is something that really helps to form connections, especially if you're being intentional about who you're connecting with. And so you really want to make this process joyful and celebrate what you're working on because you deserve it. You're putting in all of this effort to do something that really you do not have to, that a lot of people aren't necessarily requesting from you, but because you have identified your why, you are putting in the time and the effort. So I highly encourage celebrating and bringing joy to the process, including, and there's so many recommendations out there on how to practice the language in fun ways, either listening to podcasts or listening to movies, ones that you're familiar with, but in the target language. That's not necessarily the goal of this because there's tons of resources for that. I wanted you all to have something that you could use in order to empower the conversations that you're having with your teachers and your language tutors. Ideally, they're having these conversations with you, but often in spaces where you are learning a language, the teacher's asking you, why are you learning the language? When do you want to learn it by? And then they'll help you kind of frame that curriculum. But these questions, the more that you are clear on the three steps to language planning, the more you can co-create your language plan with your teacher, which gives you autonomy, which hopefully helps you buy in and makes you feel like you are empowered in this process. So for additional support, feel free to reach out to me on lupatalks.com or lupatalks@gmail.com. I'd be happy to support further any conversation around language planning, any recommendations on resources. Also, there's a QR code so that you can tell me, was this supportive? Was this useful? How did you find this helpful? And how are you using these language plans? And feel free to throw in the comments any questions that you might have or your goals. What are your goals in terms of language learning? What is your why if you've already identified that? If you have the framework, share that in the comment section so that we can start a dialogue, not just of I'm learning a language and I'm going to be fluent. That is fantastic, but uh, that's very wishy-washy. That's very flimsy. And for that reason, a lot of folks get distracted or feel like they're not making the progress that they want to make. I want you to be very intentional, very focused, get your plan together. And that way you feel like I got this. I know exactly what I'm doing. Now it's just a matter of putting new vocabulary in my brain and trying it out. So I am so proud of you for trying something new, for learning different variations of a language. I think that that is in and of itself something to celebrate. So I'm proud of you. Keep it up. And I'm here as a resource if you need any help. Ciao. Adios. Bye.